In a town where flags still wave but promises have long since faded, Victor Bellamy walks alone, silent, steady, and watched. One wrong glance could invite trouble. One wrong step, a warning disguised as kindness. When a patrol car shadows his every move and a curious journalist raises her camera, the first crack splinters the facade of Brookhaven. In a place built on appearances, Victor's quiet defiance is about to awaken a storm no one sees coming. Victor Bellamy adjusted the brim of his hat as the patrol car crawled behind him, the old sidewalks of Brookhaven whispering with each of his steps. The air carried the metallic taste of early fog, tinged with the faint sweetness of chimney smoke and something colder, less natural. Across Main Street, Veterans Day banners drooped from rusted poles, their colors dulled under a sky still bruised from the night. Last month, someone had slashed the flag hanging from Victor's porch. No storm had caused it, no apology had followed. Victor walked with measured steps, the heel of his boots brushing faintly against loose gravel, the creak of a hanging barbershop sign punctuating each pause. He didn't glance back, didn't alter his pace, though he could hear the slow roll of tires pressing against the cracked asphalt behind him. Deputy Blake Rourke was nothing if not persistent. A block away, inside Earl's Diner, Samantha Porter nursed a chipped mug of black coffee, her notebook forgotten beside her. She caught the glint of patrol lights flickering across shop windows, saw the stiff tilt of Victor's shoulders. Something tightened at the edge of her gut. She slid her phone onto her lap, camera tilted discreetly against the window, thumb hovering over the record button. Victor reached the corner where the library loomed, a boxy structure with crumbling stone steps and a fading mural of a bald eagle above its door. Rourke rolled the patrol car up beside him, engine purring low. "Mornin', Mr. Bellamy," Rourke called out, voice syrupy, edged with something sour. Victor acknowledged him with a slight nod, nothing more. "Fine day to be out walking," Rourke continued, easing himself out of the cruiser. His boots landed on the pavement with a deliberate scrape. "Gotta keep an eye on things, you know. Streets aren't as safe as they used to be." Victor adjusted his grip on the worn leather strap of his satchel but said nothing. His silence was an old habit, cultivated like a scar. Tough, unyielding. Sam watched, heart ticking faster. She zoomed in subtly. The deputy's smile was wide, too wide, the kind that never reached the eyes. "You just heading to the library, sir?" Rourke asked, taking a casual step closer. His belt creaked under the weight of his gear. Some folks been worried, seeing unfamiliar faces and all. Victor let the words hang, gave a half-turn of his head as if weighing whether they deserved an answer. Then, with a slight, respectful tip of his hat, he resumed walking, bootsteps steady. Rourke mirrored his pace for a moment, close enough that Victor could smell the sour tang of coffee on his breath. A shadow flickered across Victor's path, a flag overhead snapping in the breeze, and he paused at the base of the library steps. Rourke leaned in, just enough for Victor to feel the oppressive weight of his presence. The deputy's voice dropped low, mock concerned. "Don't want to trip, old man." Victor's hand tightened imperceptibly around the satchel strap. The corners of his mouth didn't even twitch. Instead, he climbed the steps with the same steady gait, the wooden door creaking open at his touch. Sam exhaled a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. She thumbed through the footage she'd captured, skimming past frames of fog and brick, landing squarely on Rourke's face. There, as Victor disappeared into the library, Sam replayed her footage, catching a flash of pure contempt in Rourke's eyes. Inside the library, the smell of aging books mingled with something sharper, the unspoken weight of being watched. Dust hung in the still air, catching the pale sunlight struggling through the high windows. The ticking of an old brass clock above the circulation desk cut into the silence with a steady, indifferent rhythm. Victor Bellamy closed the door behind him with care, pausing a moment to let his eyes adjust. The library was almost empty, save for Mrs. Elaine Mays, perched nervously behind the desk, her hands fluttering at a stack of overdue notices. Her gray hair was pulled into a taut bun, but a few rebellious strands framed her lined face, softening her otherwise rigid demeanor. Victor nodded in greeting. "Morning, Mrs. Mays." She looked up too quickly, a smile forced and brittle. "Morning, Mr. Bellamy. Lovely day, isn't it?" He didn't answer immediately, taking a slow step across the wooden floorboards that creaked under his boots. The chess club corner, usually bustling with retirees and eager teenagers, sat empty. The pieces on the nearest board were mid-game, abandoned, the Black Queen tilted onto her side. Victor noticed the absence without a word. He moved deeper into the library, the musty scent of paper growing thicker. Mrs. Mays tucked a lock of hair behind her ear, her eyes darting briefly to the front door as it creaked open again. Sheriff Curtis Harlan entered, with the ease of a man visiting his own living room. His khaki uniform was immaculate, his boots polished to a mirror shine. His smile, warm and neighborly, flashed across the room as he waved at Mrs. Mays. "Morning, Miss Elaine," he drawled, voice sliding like oil over water. "Morning, Sheriff," Mrs. Mays replied, her smile faltering. Harlan sauntered between the rows of dusty shelves, exchanging pleasantries with the few patrons scattered in the reading alcoves. But it was Victor he approached with deliberate slowness, boots thudding quietly against the floor. Victor stood near a table of historical archives, thumbing through a battered volume. He didn't look up when Harlan stopped beside him. "Good to see you out and about, Mr. Bellamy," Harlan said, voice coated with sugary warmth. "A man's got to stay active in his golden years." Victor turned a page slowly, the crackle of paper loud in the charged silence. "Reading's good for the mind," he said, voice low but steady. Harlan chuckled, slapping the table lightly. "Amen to that. Especially these days, with all the changes coming to Brookhaven. New people, new ideas, not everyone fits in so easy." He leaned a little closer, the edges of his grin sharpening. "Sometimes old foundations need clearing for new growth. Hope you understand, Mr. Bellamy." Victor's jaw tightened, but he gave no outward sign he'd heard the warning buried in the sheriff's words. He simply nodded, as if acknowledging the passage of weather, and returned to his reading. Across the room, Sam Porter watched the exchange over the rim of her coffee-stained notebook. She scribbled a few meaningless lines, pretending to work, but her eyes stayed fixed on the two men. The hairs on the back of her neck prickled. No one else in Earl's diner had reacted to Rourke's behavior that morning. And now, inside the supposed sanctuary of a public library, she saw the same hush, the same careful glances that said more than words. Sam rose from her seat and crossed to Mrs. Mays's desk under the pretense of asking about local history archives. Mrs. Mays fumbled with a pile of library cards, her hands trembling. "Mrs. Mays," Sam said quietly, "has this sort of thing been happening often?" The librarian's eyes widened for a fraction of a second before shuddering closed. She shook her head briskly, lips pressed into a thin line. "Town's just going through changes," she murmured, not meeting Sam's gaze. "People get nervous." Before Sam could press further, Mrs. Mays dropped a stack of bookmarks onto the floor, bending hastily to pick them up. The conversation was over. Sam backed away, heart pounding. She returned to her table, hands trembling slightly as she packed her things. She needed air. Her phone buzzed against the tabletop. A single text from an unknown number lit up the cracked screen. "Keep filming. You're not alone." Bronze statues of soldiers glinted under the low sun as Victor approached the Veterans Memorial Rehearsal, alone among flags and hollow speeches. The wind picked up dry leaves, swirling them around the cracked base of the memorial, where faded wreaths lay forgotten from last year's ceremony. The plaques, once proud and gleaming, now bore the pockmarks of neglect and time. Victor moved with deliberate calm across the grass, his footsteps muffled against the brittle patches of ground. Officials in polished blazers and ill-fitting ties bustled about with clipboards and creased scripts, shouting orders too loudly, laughing too falsely. No one turned to greet him. No one offered him a place among the group rehearsing patriotic platitudes. Decades ago, Victor had marched under banners that said freedom. Today, they looked faded, like promises too long deferred. He paused at the edge of the gathering, hands resting lightly atop his cane, though he barely leaned on it. His gaze swept the scene, a microphone adjusted and readjusted, chairs set and reset, none of them bearing his name. He watched without bitterness, merely noting. The omission was no accident. It never was. Near the vendor tents, Sam Porter adjusted the strap of her satchel, trying to blend in with the small crowd. Her camera lens caught everything, the officials' easy camaraderie, their quick glances away when Victor approached, the way they shifted subtly to block him from view. Frustration burned low in Sam's chest. She crossed the lawn toward Victor, weaving through clusters of onlookers and volunteers. When she reached him, she kept her voice low, aware of how sound carried in the open air. "I have everything," she said, holding out a thumb drive in her gloved hand. Rourke, Harlan. Half the town looking the other way. You don't have to stand alone anymore. Victor turned to her slowly, the corners of his eyes crinkling in a smile that was neither sad nor bitter. It simply was patient, immovable, inevitable. Not yet, he said softly, his voice carrying more weight than the speeches blaring from the faulty speakers behind them. Sam closed her hand around the drive, feeling the cool plastic dig into her palm. She wanted to protest, to shake him from his stillness, but something in his gaze stopped her. Not fear, not resignation, calculation, timing. From the sidelines, Reverend Leroy Amos watched the exchange, his broad frame leaning lightly against a lamppost. He said nothing, merely observing, as he had done for years, a witness to truths the town tried to forget. Beyond him, almost invisible against the backdrop of swaying flags and folding chairs, a lone figure in military boots and a dark jacket moved with a purpose foreign to the sleepy ceremony. She surveyed the area, the open line of sight to the memorial, the limited exit points, the blind spots no one else seemed to notice. Her stance was loose, but her gaze was sharp, cataloging vulnerabilities like a seasoned tactician. Then, as quickly as she had appeared, she faded into the drifting crowd, leaving no footprint behind. Sam's heart thudded against her ribs. She caught only a fleeting glimpse, the glint of polished boots, the stiff line of a spine trained to anticipate threat before it arrived. Different, alert, out of place. That night, long after the rehearsal had broken up and the banners had sagged back into their tired folds, Sam sat in a booth at the back of the cafe, nursing a cup of overbrewed coffee. She reviewed her footage again and again, the day's images blurring into a grim collage of apathy and erasure. When she finally reached under the table to retrieve her satchel, her fingers brushed against something stiff wedged into the wood, a folded slip of paper, blocky letters scrawled across it. Depot, midnight. The depot's broken windows blinked like tired eyes as Sam stepped inside and found herself staring down the quiet certainty of a soldier. Dust motes spun lazily in the shafts of weak moonlight filtering through the cracked roof, and the air smelled of rust, old paper, and something colder, purpose. Her footsteps echoed across the warped floorboards, each creak underscoring her unease. She kept her phone gripped tightly in one hand, thumb poised near the emergency dial. Every instinct told her to turn around, to run back to the safety of the known, but curiosity, and something deeper, something stubborn, rooted her in place. Near the far end of the depot, where old ticket counters leaned against sagging walls, a figure stood with hands folded behind her back. The woman didn't move, didn't speak, only watched as Sam approached. In the dim light, Sam caught flashes of sharp lines. Military boots, a dark jacket zipped up to the throat, posture so precise it looked almost unnatural in the ruin around her. Victor's refusal to act impulsively hadn't been fear. It had been a quiet strategy, a waiting game, for the right hand to move at the right time. Sam understood that now, too late to back out. "You're late," the woman said, voice low but carrying easily through the hollowed space. Sam swallowed hard, her mouth dry. "Had to be sure I wasn't walking into a setup." The woman's lips twitched, almost a smile. "Good. You're learning." Stepping closer, Sam could finally make out her face. Strong features, hair tied back into a neat knot at the nape of her neck. No insignia, no rank displayed, but everything about her screamed discipline, authority held in check by sheer will. "Name's Alexis Bellamy," she said simply. No hand offered for shaking, no unnecessary words. Sam's breath caught. Bellamy. Pieces tumbled into place. The sharp figure near the memorial, the silent watchfulness, the way Victor had smiled at things unseen. "You're his?" "Daughter," Alexis confirmed, voice clipped but not unkind. "And right now, the only reason you're still in the game." Sam didn't know whether to feel relieved or terrified. Maybe both. Alexis reached into the satchel slung across her body and pulled out a battered folder, dropping it onto a nearby counter with a soft thud. Dust puffed into the stale air. Inside were photographs, grainy screenshots, pages stamped confidential in faded ink. Sam flipped through them with trembling fingers. Images of deputy meetings after hours, payments under the table, doctored crime scene photos, names she recognized, names she didn't. "This isn't just Brookhaven," Alexis said, stepping back into the shadowed edge of the room. "It runs through half the county lines. Silence isn't a flaw here. It's their system." Sam's pulse pounded in her ears. The air seemed heavier, the floor less stable under her boots. She stared down at the images, feeling the enormity of them seep into her bones. Alexis watched her silently for a moment, gauging her reaction. "You've got two choices," she said finally, voice even. "Stay safe, walk away. Hope someone else burns it down someday." Sam lifted her gaze, locking eyes with her. "Or?" she asked, already knowing the answer. Alexis reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out a small black USB drive. She crossed the space between them with steady, unhurried steps, placing it onto the dusty counter between them. "This isn't just about my father. It's about all the ones they think no one's watching." The words hung between them, heavier than the air. Sam's fingers closed around the drive, cold and solid in her palm. She nodded, not trusting her voice, and turned toward the exit. Her body trembled, but her steps were steady. Outside, as she pushed through the depot doors into the cutting night air, she caught sight of something that twisted her gut into a tight knot. 3 police cruisers rolled slowly down the main road, their headlights dimmed, tires whispering against the cracked asphalt, heading straight for Victor's house. Floodlights splintered the early morning mist as Victor stepped onto his porch, hands steady at his sides. The cold sank into his bones, but he barely noticed. Across the cracked street, shadows moved, uniformed men adjusting their belts, murmuring into radios, trying too hard to look casual. The floodlights pinned Victor in a harsh, colorless glare, making his every breath a visible defiance. Victor had stood before men with guns and badges before. What broke them wasn't bullets. It was shame. Deputy Blake Rourke climbed the porch steps 2 at a time, boots striking wood with a heavy finality. Sheriff Curtis Harlan hung back near the patrol cars, arms crossed, face unreadable under the brim of his hat. "Mr. Bellamy," Rourke called, voice too loud, meant to carry to the gathering crowd that was beginning to press against the edges of the mist. "We need you to come with us. Just a few questions, nothing serious." Victor rested one hand lightly against the porch railing, the American flag stitched hastily back together, fluttering beside him. "Without a warrant?" Victor asked, tone mild, almost conversational. Rourke's jaw tightened. "We're just doing our job. Cooperation goes a long way." Victor's eyes, clear and unblinking, met Rourke's. He didn't move, didn't flinch. No warrant, no entry. Behind him, lights in neighboring houses flicked on. Doors opened. Figures emerged. Reverend Leroy Amos first, pulling a long coat around his stooped shoulders, holding a single candle against the chill. Then others. Mrs. Harris from the bakery, the Johnson twins, old Mr. Ruiz with his oxygen tank rattling. They lined the sidewalk silently, faces grave, phones held aloft, cameras blinking red. The deputies shifted uneasily. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. Rourke took another step closer, invading Victor's space. His voice dropped to a low growl. "Don't make this harder than it has to be, old man." Victor's only answer was the slow lift of his chin, offering nothing but the dignity that had carried him through wars abroad and wars at home. The floodlights hummed. A shoe scuffed against pavement. Someone coughed. And then, without warning, Rourke shoved Victor. A quick, sharp movement, not hard enough to knock him down, but hard enough to jolt his body backward, to make the flag whip in the sudden gust. Dozens of phones captured the moment. Flashlights blinked faster now, a silent strobe of witnessing. Across the street, Sam Porter stood frozen, heart hammering against her ribs. Her laptop was open inside her car, hotspot glowing, the USB drive from Alexis already loaded. The cursor hovered over the upload button. Her breath caught. This was it, the line between seeing and acting. Victor's silhouette remained steady on the porch, even as the world tried to push him off it. Sam pressed her finger down. The screen flashed confirmation, and the encrypted files, footage of Rourke, the evidence from Alexis, the decades of rot baked into Brookhaven soil, began their flight into the bloodstream of the internet. She leaned back against the seat, trembling, watching the ripple begin. Within minutes, the hum of incoming notifications filled the air, like distant drums growing louder. By dawn, Brookhaven wasn't a secret anymore, and neither was its rot. Headlines rippled through news feeds like cracks across glass, small-town sheriff resigns amid scandal, silent uprising in Brookhaven, a veteran's stand ignites change. Vans from state investigators and regional news stations lined Main Street, their antennas stabbing the pale morning sky. The sun broke through in muted gold, struggling to warm the brittle air. Veterans Day banners hung limply above the town square, trembling as if unsure of their place. The ceremony went on because it had to. The script could not be abandoned so easily, even if the actors had changed. Folding chairs were arranged in neat rows before the worn stone stage. Children held miniature flags, mothers adjusted collars. Fathers murmured low to each other, their eyes flickering not to the stage, but to the man standing silent near the edge of the crowd. Victor Bellamy wore his best coat, a simple thing, frayed at the cuffs but pressed sharp as any parade uniform. His hat rested neatly under one arm. His posture was easy, unforced, yet he stood taller than the marble soldiers etched into the memorial behind him. Sheriff Curtis Harlan took the stage first, his face a study in defeat camouflaged as dignity. He clutched a paper in shaking hands, reading his resignation with the hollow formality of a man who had not chosen this ending. Applause did not follow. Only the steady crackle of a distant news camera broke the silence. Deputy Blake Rourke stood behind him, face drained of its usual smirk, a state investigator murmuring quietly at his side. There would be hearings, depositions, fingerprints pressed into ink. Rourke's shoulders sagged like a man finally realizing the ground had shifted beneath him long before he noticed. The mayor stumbled through a few strained remarks about healing and new beginnings, but the words fell like pebbles into a dry well. Then, Reverend Leroy Amos, standing off to the side, lifted a hand, not in a blessing, but in a command. "We cannot go forward," he said, voice even and carrying, without first recognizing the one among us who never moved, even when all else did. Murmurs swept the crowd. Some stiffened. Some exhaled as if waiting years for this moment. "Mr. Bellamy," Amos said, extending a hand toward Victor. The world seemed to pause. Victor didn't stride to the stage. He walked with the same measured, quiet dignity he had carried through every silent war the town thought he hadn't noticed. He mounted the steps one at a time, every crease in his coat a line in an old, proud map. No fanfare met him, no roaring applause. Instead, as he turned to face the people of Brookhaven, the crowd rose. Slowly, one by one. Hats removed. Backs straightened. Hands lifted in a silent salute. A gesture not of duty, but of earned respect. Victor stood without speaking. He didn't need to. His presence was the statement, the verdict, the answer. Near the back of the crowd, partially hidden by the lowered brim of her ball cap, Alexis Bellamy watched. She remained still, arms folded, a shadow among the banners and folding chairs. Her mission was never to be seen, only to make sure her father was. Sam Porter stood not far from her, camera forgotten by her side, throat tight with something she refused to name. Pride. Relief. Something closer to reverence. The breeze caught the edge of the repaired flag, snapping it sharply once, then settling again. In a diner across the square, a young reporter whispered into her phone, head bent low over her notes. Brookhaven wasn't the only town. They're all watching now. The morning light caught the edges of Victor's coat as he stood beneath the battered banners, a quiet anchor in a town finally learning to listen. Justice had not come through noise or violence, but through the steady insistence of dignity refusing to bow. True strength, he showed, lies not in shouting louder than injustice, but in outlasting it with patience sharpened into resolve. And sometimes, the most enduring revolutions begin not with fire or fury, but with one man standing firm when the world expects him to fall. If this story touched your heart, consider passing its quiet courage onward to those still waiting to be seen.